afternoon, evening, however you clock it here. I want to explain a couple of things that weren't on the bio. I was born and raised in the Omaha, Nebraska area, and I did my undergrad work in Manhattan, Kansas. There's a Manhattan, Kansas, and it's not the cool Manhattan you're thinking of. And studied there. I did a Bachelor of Science in Bible and Missions, and I attended Kansas State University, which was literally across the street. It was just across the street. So there I was able to take 2 years of journalism, mostly print, and a semester of geology with an evolutionary geologist, and a semester in environmental geography, which is not what it would be today. And I was permitted to play in the very back section of the Kansas State University Symphony, which was kind of cool. There was no third section, or I'd be in the third section, or so. Anyway, I'm a little bit befuddled today. As I mentioned at Mountain View, sometimes I don't know which glasses to wear. I got these today at Shoppers. My trifocals are in two pieces now because the airbags took them out this week. And I'll get into that a little bit. You don't want to hear my stories exactly. But what I want to discuss today, I received two really shocking things this last 2 weeks. We were on holidays in Branson, Missouri. If you don't know Branson, it's the Christian version of Vegas. It's bluegrass, no gambling, very little alcohol, but just that sort of thing. We were there with a couple of my daughters and their families. And so on the way back, during that time we were down there, I got a letter, a very sad letter, that Lincoln Christian Seminary, which is part of Lincoln Christian University, is closing. And it's closing not because it went woke, not because of debt, of course. They're merging with another school, and that's quite a shock to me. The reason has something to do with what I'm talking about today, because they made this mistake, I believe, not of going woke. In fact, they actually have a lawsuit against them for dismissing a student for sexual deviancy. But they were actually, they became a university about 6 or 7 years ago, which is usually, to me, has the taste of death on it. When you decide as a Bible college you're going to become a university, because what happens in that, and I'm going to just put this out here, is I don't think there's a university in North America, period. There's a smorgasbord of unrelated courses that you can take. You can go to a school, and parents send their kids to the school because they're going to be an accountant or pre-med, or they're going to be an engineer, but they have no cohesion at all. The Christian worldview created the medieval university because there was a center to the whole thing. There's no uni in the university. University of Toronto is not a university. There's no cohesion, there's no connection between the different disciplines. They are at each other's throats. I even saw that back in a long time ago when I was at Kansas State University. You had one department that would cancel the other department out if it was taken to that. So Tyndale, Redeemer, these are not universities in the classical sense. These are schools where you can choose and pick. Now, what happens in Bible colleges become universities is because parents do not want their children to get a Bible education exclusively, or students do not want to grow up, young men do not want to grow up to be preachers. And so our Bible colleges in most evangelical worlds are doing very poorly, because our churches are doing very poorly. Now, I want to speak about today what is man, Christian anthropology. And anthropology means simply the study of man. What is man? And since that question came up a couple years ago, what is a woman? I can't say I don't have a degree in biology. That's what I'm talking about. See, I studied law, I didn't study biology, I can't answer the question. And that didn't disqualify her. That the Supreme Court justice being interviewed. She should have been laughed out of the room. But it was accepted as an answer. So we need to look at Christian anthropology and corruption. Now, when I use the word corruption tonight, I looked over my notes, I thought I probably should use a different word. I don't mean simply kickbacks and bribes and theft and things like that. I mean decay. It's like that salmon you put in the back of your fridge, and you think you're going to cook that later, and you wake up on the third floor of your house and you smell something really bad on the, corruption, decay, falling apart. That's really what we're looking at today, and what a Christian anthropology can answer to that. Now, I'm not going to give you anything that's going to just say we're going to solve this problem. I'm going to try to challenge you to be something different than we have been as a church. Individual Christians. Now, I do not know almost all of you, and I may insult your intelligence. This may be so basic to you, you're going to say, well, yes, okay, thank you, Mr. Obvious, just go home. Maybe not. I hope I will challenge you. If I remember well enough, I got longer notes than I ever do for a sermon, more detailed, but if I forget the names, I'm hoping to remember them because I underlined them, of different authors you should be familiar with just to get started. And these are not great academics. These are not vastly deep thinkers, but they are people you need to know. So the problem of Christian anthropology, now, if you believe that everything's right with the world, well, you've walked into the wrong conference, obviously. We are obviously, I think, so clearly facing unprecedented corruption. That means decay in every institution. I can't think of one human institution that is not at some level falling apart. I can make a list, right? Now, to me, the two things that happened this last 2 weeks, the seminary closing, and I'll get back to that a little bit, because the seminary closing, you said, well, there's other seminaries, yes, but there's something that was unique about Lincoln that, and it's the best seminary you've never heard of. I'm wearing this tie because I couldn't find my red bow tie, but this tie has on it the logo of Lincoln Christian Seminary. It's about 40 years old, to give you an idea how far we're out. And so I thought, well, wear that in honor of this seminary. But it's a great mistake when schools that cannot say what a university is, become a university. Bible colleges should have a purpose of training men for ministry, period. It could be a Bible college, it could be a seminary, call it what you want to, give out degrees, whatever. As my mentor in seminary said, you want a degree? Get a thermometer. They have degrees too. But what he cared about is that you would become a lifelong student. And that you would really, I'll speak about him a little bit later. He's deceased now. But this corruption began, we have not had in public education anything Christian for at least 100 years in Canada, probably 200 years in the U.S., since Horace Mann, okay? Public education, but we had the Lord's Prayer in church. Yeah, I know, but you didn't believe in God. We had Lord's Prayer in school. Yeah, God was not the center. God was peripheral, and now he's out. Okay, obviously he's out, okay? So we haven't had Christian education and public education for a very long time. But the university implies the doctrine of the one and the many, that there's that the center holds together, the individual is important, but then the other side of things is the many, all these different things. How can a geology work with humanities and English work with politics? They do. There is a center, but only in the Christian worldview. And so when you abandon the Christian worldview, you basically got a buffet. I like buffets, obviously. But if you look at, there's two kinds of meals. You go to a buffet and you can just get, I'm going to have the Chinese food over here, the Asian food. And now I'm going to have good old Canadian food over here. But you have this breaking apart. Or you could go to another restaurant where everything from the experience, from walking in the door to the appetizers, the salads, the drinks, everything is all a cohesive whole. Where you have this meal that makes sense. And so you're not going to be, putting hot sauce on your steak or something strange, something unforgivable like ketchup, on your steak. But I said there are two things. The second thing, and this is personal, and this is not as long-lasting. On our way home from Branson, Yahoo, in Chicago, a car in Markham, Illinois. I don't like Markham, Ontario very much. Traffic is horrible. Same thing in Markham, Illinois. A car coming towards me, a woman turns, and I've never experienced airbags before. So I lost my glasses, lost a few other things. Car totaled the rental Camry that I rented in Canada. So what's that had to do with this? Institutional corruption. So we're sitting in a hotel room after Uber gives us a ride to a hotel, get a place, and I'm on the phone all the time. Insurance companies don't exist for the victims. Nothing's happening. Finally, one rental car company I won't mention because there may be reasons, but they said, well, okay, just call one of our agents up there and you'll get a replacement car, we'll cover it. 0 cars in Chicago that will rent one way. I didn't know that. I learned something. I'm old and I've learned new things. And not only that, the Uber driver said, oh yeah, they don't even have cars local anymore. You go to the airport, O'Hare, Chicago, O'Hare, you might not be able to get a rental car. Oh, okay. That's why Uber is so popular. And so I honestly did this. I thought, well, who rents one way? U-Haul. So we came home in a U-Haul truck, my wife and I. If you remember the story, the Home Alone, at the end of the story, we didn't have the polka band, and I let my wife sit up front with me. So we spent 2 days driving home from the Chicago area in a U-Haul. And I got to take it back tomorrow. I'm trying to figure out another thing to do with it, but it has to go back. Why is that corruption? How is that decay? What has happened to supply chain in commerce? Okay, anybody here has done anything that is more than just picking up a dozen eggs, maybe not even that. If you had to buy anything, build anything, sell anything, what's happened to supply chain? Why is it you could get cars before COVID and now you can't get cars? That's part of the corruption. Now, some of that corruption is intended. I mean, I look at what the government has done to us with lockdowns and shuttering factories, and that's part of the problem. That is what I'm getting at, that we have this massive decay and failure, and I believe a lot of it can be laid at our own feet. So if I speak about human institutions being in the state of decay, think about health and health care. Think about the family and who intrudes on the family. Who has the final right over the family? If you've ever dealt with CAS, you know what I'm talking about. Education. Who will determine what is best for a child? Who determines that? And we see that when all of this is anti-Christian, we see that is corruptive. When you see finance and finances, runaway inflation, printing money. Why are you paying more? Why are you younger people likely not to be able to buy a house in the near future? And I don't blame boomers. I didn't vote for that, see? But we have runaway inflation. That's a corruption thing. You look in the Old Testament, the wicked kings put dross in the silver to make it go further. That was a corruption. Business and commerce are corrupted today. And I'm not just talking about the people that run the rental agencies. I couldn't get a car. They had nothing to do with this, but they're feeling that. The trades are often in the same kind of thing where you have to cut corners. You're commanded to, or your union does not allow you to do what is right. That sort of thing. Government, you don't want to talk about government corruption. Science, which is no longer following evidence, but it is following your own, the lust for power. Our own Fauci is coming to Hamilton next month. Cheapest ticket's $300. I don't want that for Christmas, okay? The most expensive ticket is $50,000. I only want to make a sign and stand outside the banquet hall in Hamilton and say, I followed the money and here I am. Science is corrupt. Law is corrupt. Defense is corrupt. Now, if I were a dispensationalist, and I'm not going to talk a lot about eschatology, I don't want to make anyone too nervous, I could write this all off and say that's just a sign of the times. Turn on the news and look for more signs of the time. Jesus is coming any second now. But I'm a theonomist and a postmillennialist. And I don't really have that. I don't get off so easily. We do not get our truth about God's word and truth from the facts of the matter from the news. I won't go further other than just to simply say that the church has suffered under this dispensationalism for almost 200 years. And the church has set aside its responsibilities, and we are complicit. Read Bonhoeffer. Look at what Bonhoeffer did before the Nazis, what they did to him. But look even at the pietism at the end of the 19th century and see how they stepped aside and let horrors begin, and possibly the most bloody century in human history ensued because no one was approaching these issues. And the church especially was silent. So I want to pull back a little bit. There's an illustration that James Strauss, my professor, gave. He's called the fly in the beaker. Now, you've all heard of the frog in the beaker, turn the heat up, and this is probably a little more accurate. If you've seen the pictures of a beaker, a laboratory beaker, and there's a condensing coil of glass, right? And mad scientists use those, I don't know. But if you came down to the lab in the morning and there's a fly in the beaker and it's sealed at the top, how'd the fly get in there? He went in the end, and he went all the way down. Now, if the fly's going to get out of the beaker, how's he going to get out? The same way he went in. And so what we have to learn to do, and this will be bigger than what I can do tonight, is we have to unpack how it is we got here. How it is we've got, name the atrocity. How do we get to that point? It didn't just start one day, everyone decided, let's be totally idiotic pagans. It didn't start that way. We have to retrace our step. Now, I obviously don't know you, and I don't want to insult your intelligence. We tried to do this at Lincoln Christian College and Seminary in the late 1970s. I started in 79 in the 80s with interdisciplinary studies. They said, since the universe is all created by God, heavens and earth, and it coheres. There's a God, and there's everything else. God is not creation. Creation is not God. And therefore, because of God knowing these things, we can know things. And so knowledge is possible. In the modern world, knowledge is not possible. You have your knowledge, but we don't have a common knowledge. And so they started with looking at how all these things fit together. That's the heritage that I gained as a student. So we have to remember several things I wanted to say at the beginning. I'm still at the beginning. The universe is a cohesive creation. There's nothing in this universe that God is not aware of, that God did not create. No random, as Sproul said, no random molecules buzzing around without his knowledge or permission or control. The universe is a cohesive creation, and there's a great gulf fixed between the creator and the created. There is progress. Now, everyone who says they're progressive today, we know, well, we use the word fruitcake to go along with that. You're progressive, yes. There's a pagan progressiveness, but there's also a progress that is biblical. And like I said, I can't spend all my time on that today. But biblical anthropology, and what is it that separates it from non-biblical anthropology? Because everybody knows what a human is, but now we're into transhumanism. We are into, I don't know how many genders today. I've not followed that very closely. I want to look in the Bible to Genesis 1. Turn in the Bible to Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that is the Hebrew idiomatic way of saying everything. God created everything. God without the assistance of man, God without anyone else, without any need. And I would call that God as the Trinity, the ontological Trinity. Then God said, I'm sorry, skipped a bunch of a chapter. Verse 26, go down to verse 26. And then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is where we have to begin to unpack our Christian worldview. This is not Islam. Islam would never allow this, because you cannot have man in God's image. Man is God's highest creation, but not his image. To see that, I think they would deny this vehemently. No other world religion would declare this, that God created man in his image, but he is not God. So we have Mormonism, where man becomes God. You have Jehovah's Witnesses, where Christ is an angel, and all sorts of things that go around this. But this is a cornerstone to what we must understand, or our worldview as a Christian falls apart. Now, here's one of the people I want to mention today. Francis Schaeffer. You've heard of Francis Schaeffer. I think if you get to a used bookstore, I like to go on Tuesdays to Mission Thrift Store and get there ahead of Steve, because he picks up used books, and we're kind of a little competition going on. I saw in his library, he showed me his new books he got. I said, yeah, I saw those. I left those for you. Schaeffer, in his book, Genesis in Space and Time. Now, that just sounds like a weirdo title. What he means is Genesis is really real. In space, it happened in a place, and in time, it was not just in a galaxy far, far away and long, long ago. It actually happened. And Schaeffer would call it true truth. Look at this. I'm just going to read this quote. I have a couple of quotes today. I'm not going to let other people do all my work, but I can't say this better. What is it that differentiates Adam and Eve from the rest of creation? We find the answer in Genesis 1:26, and God said, let us make man in our image. You see what he's saying here? See, we are not only creation. We are man. We are created in God's image. There's not an animal on earth. We are not animals. We are separate from that. We are separate from animals, machine, the physical world. We're like that, but we're certainly not that. There's a distinction between us and the rest of creation. And that's denied today everywhere. What differentiates Adam from the rest of creation is that they were created in the image of God. For 20th century man, this phrase, the image of God, is as important as anything in Scripture, because men today can no longer answer the crucial question. Now, this book came out, I think, in the late 70s. Okay? Who am I? In his own naturalistic theories, with the uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system, that means there's no God, no miracles, nothing from outside, with an evolutionary concept of a mechanical chance parade from the atom to man, man has lost his unique identity. See, like Carl Sagan said, all we are is star stuff. The universe is all one thing, and you're just part of it. You just evolved better than others. But there's no difference between you and a single atom. This is why you have, the philosopher, is it Harvard or MIT Singer, that says a dog is a pig, is a boy. There's no difference in that worldview. Now, why is it so easy then to exterminate an elderly or a handicapped or a depressed person in Canada? Because there's no distinction. If you had a dog that was suffering greatly, you would put the dog down. If you have a human that's suffering greatly, you alleviate the suffering, but not in the evolutionary worldview. And so man has lost his identity. And as he looks upon the world, back to Schaeffer here, as he faces the machine, he sees the world as a machine, he cannot tell himself in what he faces. He cannot distinguish himself from other things. So it goes back to my question, what's a woman? Well, if you can't answer that question, you're not going to be able to answer what is a man. How can we solve the human condition? How are you going to solve homelessness? How are you going to solve economic inequities? How are you going to solve the Palestinian-Israeli problem? How are you going to solve any great problem if you cannot even identify what a man is? What is human? Okay, because you have people on either side of conflicts who are saying, well, they're not human. Adolf Hitler said that the Jews were not human. Do you understand where that goes? And he was an evolutionist. The guy named Bergman wrote a book about Hitler and the Nazi Darwinian worldview. And he lays all of Hitler at Darwin's feet. That's another book you should find somewhere. So what do we do with dominion then? Now, move from what is a man. Man's created in the image of God, or he's not. And if you are not created in the image of God, that places you in an entirely different world. And that's the world that controls our institutions today. We look at people that are just acting horribly and with horrible philosophies, but they are still image bearers. They're still bearing the image of God. But they deny that. So we come to this issue of dominion. Okay, Schaeffer writes this, it's on the basis of being created in the image of God that man has dominion over other things in the world about him. It isn't simply that man is stronger, as in fact man is often not stronger, is he, than the rest of the world. Dominion is an aspect of the image of God in the sense that man, being created in the image of God, stands between God and all which God chose to put under man. So we are the image bearers of God, and we are his vice regents. We are his representatives to take dominion of the earth. And so he says, and as that which is created, man is no higher than all that has been created, but as created in the image of God, he has a responsibility to consciously care for all that which God has put in his care. Furthermore, being created in the image of God frees us from the burden of thinking that whatever is therefore must be right. We have been given a dominion which places a moral responsibility on us. Look at the environmental movement today. Many would say we should be extinct. In fact, there's even a group called the Extinction Rebellion. And I always think, well, you first. You should have no children. You shouldn't, all those sorts of things. And that does bring me a little bit of peace at night, knowing that most of the strangest people on earth are not having children. And the people in those lobby groups. But the idea is, if you do not have an idea of uniqueness, it will not bother an energy minister to starve or freeze thousands of people based on energy costs. It will not bother them at all. Why should it bother them that you can't afford to feed your family and heat your home? That's where that comes from. Nobody would think like that 100 years ago. There were some bad thoughts going around, but that wasn't one of them. Now, the contradictory views then that we come to, we have the Bible and what the Bible presupposes. And what the Bible tells us is a biblical anthropology, study of man. What do we have contrary to that? We have materialism. That doesn't mean you just spend every day at the mall and run your credit card bills up. Materialism means that material is all there is. There's nothing, just matter. That's all you are is matter. And when you die, you are just go back into whatever universe. Or humanism, look at the Humanist Manifesto 1, Manifesto 2, and Manifesto 3. And these Humanist manifestos say there is no God. We are on our own. Now, it kind of gets me is if that's true, if any of that's true, why are we upset about anything? Why are we programmed? I would say it's bred into us to see that there's a right and a wrong. In fact, the church, of all the great institutions of the world, everyone wants to have dominion. It's like, Antifa wants to get rid of the police, but really they want to be the police. Okay? So you have these groups that, we want to just control everything. But the church for the last 200 years said, okay, you do that. We'll let you do that. And that's why we are so weak today. Evolutionism, the whole idea that we are simply progressing. And progress is inevitable, according to evolution. Now, I'm going to read another guy, a little quote from a guy named Rousseau Rushdoony. And most of you have not heard of Rushdoony. Now, people lay a lot of things at his feet that really don't belong there. And his commentary on Revelation, on Genesis, if Steve had gotten there earlier, he would have gotten the book, because I got that at the thrift store. You got to hang out at a thrift store and buy books that will never get published today, right? Old dictionaries and Christian books that no publisher would touch today. And they're not that old, okay? I may not read the whole thing, but I want to get this through to you. Implicit or explicit in all non-biblical views of the universe, non-biblical views, the concept of the doctrine of the continuity of being. The cosmos is one being, it is held, with common potentiality. There's just a common potential. It's always progress. Now, that's an assumption. There's no proof that progress is inevitable. No scientific proof, but yet that's assumed. From the lowest one-cell being up to a man, the same potentiality exists. We have no knowledge of what unchanging limitations there may be. In other words, there's a limited change can happen. That's what evolution is about. So there's no aging and death. We cannot say. These humanists are told they're necessarily unchanging ones. So the things the only thing that is unchanging is change. So this means that every stage of being, if you're an evolutionist, if your view of man is evolution, life has transcended itself. So this cell transcended itself and became more complex, more complex, more complex. You've seen the monkeys, going up the stage, and you look at that and say, okay, this guy has transcended that guy. Now you understand that's racism right baked into that, because everybody is going to transcend what we are now, and we're going to look back and say, hey, look at that. That's racism built right in. Rushdoony did not even discuss transhumanism. Have you ever tried to study a language and wish you could just download vocabulary into your brain? Well, as some people have said, well, hold my beer, we're going to do that. Transhumanism, this is the idea behind that. Because once you abandon a biblical anthropology, anything can be done. I'm really summarizing Rushdoony there because it takes some patience here. So progress then, according to Rushdoony, says that man will transcend his humanity and its limitations, even as the first semblance of life that once came into being has been transcended. If the single cell transcended itself, well, we will too. So in a couple more thousands of years of evolution, we will be recognizable. Now, that's a different kind of progress, isn't it? And what it does, though, is it takes away the glory of creation. It denies God, it denies creation. And you can deny God. I'm not going to have that fight today. But everywhere we look, the issue of creation and evolution leaves us in entirely different places. So our glory to be created in the image of God, that's a whole different picture. And progress has happened. One reason I'm a post-millennialist is because I've already lived twice as long as I would have lived at the time of Jesus. Right? I mean, what is it that brought that to us? What is it that brought that to us but the gospel, a Christian theism that realized that the universe was meant to be known and meant to be taken control of by man, and we learned to use all kinds of things since Christ. And so we built hospitals, and we learned medicine, and we did all sorts of things. This is glorifying God. Now it's all been flipped over and now turned into other things. Again, that's another talk, but I've only been given one. And the biblical doctrine, though, is not that we can do whatever we want to, but because of sin, we will die and our bodies will return to dust. The biblical doctrine, though, is that there's a discontinuity between ourselves and God. In evolutionism, you become God because there is no God. In fact, that's what we have sitting in Ottawa right now. We have God, a God. And you have it in Washington, you have it in London, you have it in every nation of the world. I am the way and the truth of life. I am God. And I like it to read in Psalms that God laughs at that. So the whole idea of evolution, taking the idea of man and making God becoming his own maker instead of responsible to God, his maker. Okay? So we cannot operate as though we have no obligation to the God that created us. This is the problem. Now, God holds us accountable. If there's no God, there's no accountability, except that which, well, the people with the most power make other people accountable. Well, that's all that's left. There's no God. So we are under authority, we're under law, God's law, and we are not our own source, and we are not our own end. So with evolution, there's nothing but God, no God at all, or any higher law. Now, what's the fruit of this? As I said before, the fruit of this kind of thinking is the bloodiest century in human history. One thing is utilitarianism, the philosophy of, well, what works is true, and let's do what works. So we talk about managing people. We see man either as a victim or an oppressor, because there's obviously, if you're a certain group, you are oppressed, and if you are of a certain group, you are the oppressor, even if you have not done anything. Human rights has been corrupted in this, because even the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is weak, and the Bill of Rights in the U.S., which is becoming weak, is individual rights. But somehow it was slipped in that individual rights are group rights. So you have rights based on what group you're in, whether it be a racial, economic, linguistic, ethnic, religious. You have a group right. And so you are not responsible individually, and you don't have individual rights. There's competing philosophies like atheism, Marxism. Everything goes to this. And since there's no final truth, there's no final facts. So this is what I kind of smile at when I think about people who are saying things today, and they talk about being on the wrong side of history. They'll be on the wrong side of history tomorrow. The people tearing down statues today, well, they wouldn't get statues, but if they did, their statues would be torn down tomorrow, because there's no final truth. See, we're trying to eliminate our history, trying to eliminate all our history, so there's no certainty, no final facts. There could be no science in this system. There's no society. It's fragmentation. So what is it that we must do? And I'm not going to say, well, go out and do this project. I can't give you 5 easy steps. 50,000 maybe, and it won't be easy. But I cannot, but you are you in your situation. You are a husband or a wife or a mother or a daughter or a child, husband, all the different relationships, employee, employer, retired, whatever you are. You have to do what you have been given to do. I keep meaning to say this in the back of my head. Scott, you got to say this, say it. The dominion mandate did not go away with the fall. Okay, so why aren't we taking dominion? And I do not mean arm yourself up and take over City Hall, but we are to have dominion over every human institution, which would include health, education, welfare, all these things. Business. See, I think it's a really sad state that in my life and before, if you really want to be an on-fire Christian for the Lord, you became a pastor. And if you were somehow in any trade, other occupation, your job was to do your job really well and give lots of money to the church. That is an unbiblical view. Luther saw it that way, and we should see it that way. There's a priesthood of all believers. So you're not on a fast track to heaven because you're a teacher or preacher or elder in the church. See, you are to take dominion over your garden, if that's what you got going, or over your condo board, or whatever you're doing. You are to do this as a Christian. I'm going to get ahead of myself on purpose because my mind is still bouncing my brain is still floating around my head after Tuesday. But so I don't want to forget this. If your evangelism does not know what to say to a judge, I become a Christian, what must I do? If your evangelism says, well, you just go to church, you're not going to go to hell because you're a Christian. If that's all it is, you've got to rethink your evangelism. Or to a doctor, or to a professor, or to a plumber, or to a lawyer, or to any occupation at all. Businessman. You are a businessman because that is taking part of the dominion. That's tending the garden. That's what God said to do. God scattered the people after the flood because they said, we're just going to do this. We're going to build this great tower. And God said, no, you got a whole world. Take it over and do it in my name. Now there's wicked, evil dominion. But there's a godly dominion that has been running silent for far too long. So if you're going to bring people into your church, into Christ, you have to be able to say, well, what is it that I will do as a judge? And none of this stuff we've been hearing, well, I know I'm a Christian, but I have to serve, I'm say an MP. I have to be an MP for all the people. Yes, you do. The atheist MP doesn't think that way. They're an MP for atheists. They're not looking out for you. A Muslim MP is not looking out for Christians. See, you have to be a Christian MP, even if it costs you your seat. Judge, anything, medical professional. You've got to see these things. You've got to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. But you're not just saying that evil sentence that I hear far too often. You don't polish brass on a sinking ship. Well, we're not on a sinking ship. We're in God's kingdom. We're on God's world. And we don't even have brass. We got better stuff. So, what do we have to do? We have to, first of all, affirm the absolute, unapologetic authority of Scripture. This is what Steve was talking about. We have to affirm the authority of Scripture. I'll say it one more time. Affirm the authority, the infallible, inerrant Word of God. And we have to reject with prejudice anti-Christian replacements, whether evolution, which is factually wrong, and it's also the implicit progress that evolution states. We have to also abandon any hope in statism or Marxism, that somehow the state's going to save us. We're going to be saved by the government. How many times have you heard yourself say, well, why doesn't the government do something? Now, I understand that because they got all your money. So if it takes money to fix something, well, I would love to, but, somebody else has it. But we have to learn to work without that. And we have to remember that any state that seeks to replace God is not submitting to God's law. Another book by Rushdoony is really helpful called The Messianic Character of Modern Education. Now that is a real humdinger of a title, and it tells you an awful lot about the book. Another really good book is by Gresham Machen. It's 100 years old, and he speaks about the desperate state of education in Nebraska in 1926. I think he calls it soul-destroying and mind-numbing education. And my wife was raised in Nebraska. I was raised in Iowa, next door to Nebraska. We're all pretty straight and narrow, conservative people. But he saw the humanism that far back. Now, what do we do? I want you to think about this submission to Scripture. Have you heard of James Sire? He wrote The Universe Next Door. And he's dead now, so he stopped updating it. But he has like 7 different worldviews. And he explains the differences, but he asked 5 questions. Every worldview, whether you're an atheist, a Muslim, a Christian, whatever, theist or deist, we don't have deism too much anymore. One is, what is really real? What is prime reality? Well, the Christian has an answer to that. Is the infinite personal God revealed in the Holy Scriptures. This God is triune, transcendent, immanent, omniscient, sovereign, and good. I had an English teacher tell me that if you're writing something and don't worry if people don't understand it, that's their problem. So I'll just move on. Second thing is external reality. What is real besides that? Besides prime reality is God. External reality in the Christian worldview is the cosmos God created out of nothing, to operate with a uniformity cause and effect on an open system. We have cause and effect. I learned physics this week. Hard. Sherry said, it's a lot like just driving straight into a wall, isn't it? Yes, it was a lot like. Only, at least that wall spun out of my way after I smacked it. But there's a cause and effect. If that person did that and I didn't launch my car over the top of it, there was a cause, effect, and here we are. That's the way of the world we live in. That's how science can progress. Science is not mystical. The worldview question number 3 is human beings. What is a human being? Human beings are created in the image of God and thus possess personality, self-transcendence. In other words, we can think outside of ourselves, intelligence, morality, generosity, and creativity. Animals can do wonderful things, but they don't think outside of themselves, and they don't improve in that sense. Worldview question number 5, knowledge. Human beings can know both the world around them and God himself because God has built into them the capacity to do so and because he takes an active role in communicating with them. And number 6, morality. What is moral? Human beings were created good, but through the fall, the image of God became defaced, though not so ruined as not to be capable of restoration through the work of Christ. God redeemed humanity and began the process of restoring people to goodness, though any given person may choose to reject that redemption. That's James Sire's words. Now, what we're looking at there is what is it? How do we see the world? A worldview is the lenses that which we see the world through. And we don't think about it. When your glasses are working, you don't think about the world. It's like a story of an old fish. These fish can talk. And 2 young fish swimming by. And the old fish said, "How do you like the water, boys?" And they just kind of ignored him and they swam by, and one fish said to the other, "What's water?" See, worldview, we don't wake up every morning thinking, now what's my worldview? You know, if I put my feet on the floor, will it be there? You know, if I, open an egg and fry an egg, is it going to, is the heat going to work? All the things. We don't question that. That's our worldview. Those are our foundational assumptions. Conversion means we change worldviews. And that's a big deal. But we do this when we come to Christ. So we have to reject. I'm going to give you some suggestions, and then we'll go home. Or there might be treats, I don't know. I'm not sure. We have to do several things. I've already mentioned evangelism. And how do you evangelize a businessman or a scientist? We have to reject humanism and man-centered approaches. I work for the Department of Children and Family Services in Illinois, which I would probably need a bulletproof vest to do that today. When I was in seminary, and I had this supervisor. Now, I was not trained in psychology, but it didn't take me a lot of psychology to know that you just had to watch your back. And I took this kid out doing stuff, and she said, well, now he's kind of off the wall. Oh, yeah, okay. She said, all we got to do is, she called it behavior mod. Basically, D.F. Skinner's view, behavior modification. All you got to do is modify his behavior. Give him a treat, give him a promise, get him to do what you want, over and over and over. And that was our solution to absolutely everything. There's no transformation, no change of heart, nothing. That's how many people operate today. That's a man-centered philosophy. We have to recommit to man's dominion in all areas of life. That's going to take some reflection. That's where you're going to have to go home and think, what does that mean? To think about dominion. It doesn't mean you're going to go park in your neighbor's driveway. I'm taking dominion over this. It's not the caricatures, okay? But it's being God's person where you are in what you're doing. It's a new commitment to family, and that's going to go into education. A new model of education within the family. You are the primary educators. It's a reintegration of the concept of a university. Now, the late James Strauss could say this much better. As I'm not quoting him. I'm quoting sorry, I should just do this. Put my hands behind my back. I'm making thunder. When I went to Lincoln, I went with the highest aspirations of all. I wanted to go to seminary closest to my home. That was my integrity at the time. And I just stumbled into this man who actually changed my life and just my way of thinking. He taught a lot of courses, philosophy and theology, okay? But he taught a theological course, and he would teach God as creator, redeemer. So you get into Hebrew, get into the Greek, and see what the Bible says about God as creator and redeemer. He taught a parallel seminar in philosophy, the history and philosophy of the physical sciences. No seminary has ever taught that kind of stuff, not in my generation. And then he had taught, of course, doctrine of creation and covenant. And so he taught also a seminar in science and philosophy, history of the and philosophy of the biological theories. Third one, which I'm into today somewhat, man as the imago Dei. That's all the Latin you need today, the image of God. And so he taught a seminar on history and philosophy of behavioral sciences. You've got what God says about man, and you got what Freud says about man, and Skinner, and Watson, and all the others. And he didn't just say, well, they're bad, God's good. He actually was doing primary sources on all these things. Biblical theology, no, this is practical stuff. Biblical theology is sin and salvation. Okay, we understand that, learn about sin and salvation. So he taught history and philosophy of political and economic theories. So we were reading in a Christian seminary, Karl Marx, and liberation theology. In Central America was a real hotbed of communism at that time. And Strauss would say things like, you don't think this is practical, do you? Is this not practical? He says, most of the world is living under communism right now. You don't think it's practical that we learn how it got there? See, you could go back on a week after you'd been in class, and you'd have to explain to people, well, why is it important for you to study economics in seminary? You're not going to be an economist. You're not going to go into financial planning. You're not going to be one of the big shot economists at the Bank of Canada. Why are you doing that? Because this is God's world, and economics are God's economics. Biology is God's biology. Geology is God's geology. So all these things, and it goes on further, Word of God and transcultural communication. Well, that's, okay, yes, what's the Bible say about the Bible, right? But then he also says, we go into philosophy of language. And can language, see today in postmodernism, as postmodernity, words mean whatever you want them to mean. It doesn't mean what the author means. See, how do we respond to that? And those are the foundation we had. And even eschatology. He taught the philosophy of history, because eschatology is a history. Eschatology, and your eschatology will determine a lot about what you do tomorrow, a lot about what you're going to do, and a lot about where we've been. So these are not just impractical things. So I remember studying linguistics, and I hated it, but I understood why we were studying it. So we also need to move, so we need to reintegrate our education system. I just stopped calling our schools universities unless they're going to be a university, and I don't think I know of any that are. We need to understand that we have to become civil, we have to resist to the point of civil disobedience. I mean, education. Vishal Mangawaldi, I will always slaughter his name. Have you heard of him? The Third Education Revolution. Indian, academic, intellectual, Christian. And he's got some really good ideas. I would just leave it with that. Find the Third Education Revolution. And he's talking about just running an end game around the people who control the gatekeepers, even in science and medicine. Just run an end game around in the churches. He's calling for churches to have homeschool universities and have academic pastors who will take students who are in the university and mentor them through as Christians. It's pretty exciting. But we have to, and we're not going to ask for permission. One thing that's really bothered me a lot is the amount of people who are living in abject poverty on the street. Now, there's something wrong with Man Solutions with people who are on the Sunshine List in Ontario. That means they're working for the government, making over 6 figures, are passing out welfare. Do you see there's a problem with that? And Hamilton has many people on the street, and they've had an entire summer and spring and now fall to figure out what they're going to do. And I just see more tents that don't look very warm. Now, there are people who are going to be eternally poor. I understand that. But there are also tons of people who are fetal alcohol syndrome children who have had no control over what their brain is doing, and they kind of break down the family, which our society causes the breakdown of society in family. So why are they not going home to family? And the chaos that humanism has caused, now we're there. But I tell you what, if you were to feed some of these people, just open a soup kitchen, you would be swarmed by regulators. Now, we don't want to poison anybody with food. But if you start passing out food, you're in trouble. Because we live in Permitistan. That's Ontario. And if you don't, do you have a permit to do that? Could you imagine some Christians getting together and just rehabilitating some places to live? But as Christians, you're going to say, we're going to first choose families with children, married couples, and offer them an extremely low rent or rent in lieu of work. All the things are illegal. No union would let you get away with that. Nobody would let you get away with that. But that's what I mean civil disobedience. We have largely in the West outsourced compassion. We go, well, somebody's going to do that. Somebody's going to fix that. Now, this doesn't mean you hand out money to everybody you'd pass every intersection in Hamilton. And some people really are choosing that. I'm not saying everyone's righteous, but there is such a case where people just have no hope, and we could be their last hope. And churches could do that without being a social gospel, without being progressive liberals, without, say, well, going to help without judgment. Well, actually, some people need to be walked through the judgment they're sensing to get back to where they need to be, where God has brought them. We need to preach the gospel to people that will liberate. Some people you help will come to Christ through that. Some people you help will despise you for it. Some people you help will just take advantage of you. But I don't think we just say, well, that's the government's job. It's not. The government's job, of course, is to protect our borders, protect us from outside influences, outside things, and we are justice, and make sure that justice is done equally for all, and it's not, right? But I want to close with this one thought. We have to, as Christians, do these things. Start thinking about what you can do, and don't be overwhelmed. I can't do everything. I cannot do most things well at all, and I depend on other people. But the church can do these things, and I believe if we start moving that direction, God will give us the resources. He always gives us the resources when we begin trusting Him. But no, like Steve said in this last little bit, I suppose I'm going long, aren't I? I got a smile over there. I'm done. Steve said that no election is going to change anything. I had in my notes, no election, petition, march, convoy, or protest will substitute for Christians living out a consistent Christian worldview. Psalm 8. To the choir master, according to the Gittith, a psalm of David. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth.